Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning in celebration of International Women's Day. And throughout the event this morning, we do encourage you, if you have any questions or comments, you can insert them in the chat found at the bottom of the screen. And at the end of the session, we will have a 10-minute Q&A segment where Jessica and Diana can provide some answers for you. Now today, CSPN's managing partner, Jessica Cryer, will be joined by Diana Frost, who is the Chief Growth Officer at Kraft Heinz Canada, for an insightful discussion surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion, and its importance in career growth, transformation, and impact through leading and empowering others. As managing partner, Jessica is responsible for managing a customer P&L and leading a team in identifying, developing, and executing organizational, customer, and category growth opportunities through the use of relevant and personalized marketing and sales strategies. Jessica also plays an integral role in defining and leading CSPN consulting initiatives. As mentioned, we are very excited to welcome our special guest, Diana Frost. Diana is the Chief Growth Officer at Kraft Heinz Canada, and she is a senior executive with more than 15 years experience. She oversees strategy and white space, research and development, digital transformation, consumer insights, and sustainability for Canada's largest food and beverage company. And with that being said, I would love to turn it over to Jessica to begin our fireside chat this morning.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jenna, and welcome everybody, and happy International Women's Day. What an exciting way to start the week on a sunny Monday, celebrating female leaders all over the world. So welcome everyone. We're very excited to be here with Diana this morning. We have a packed 45 minutes. And as Jenna said, we do have a series of questions, but we're always looking for input from the audience as well. And so if you're dying to learn something more, explore a topic deeper, please let us know, and we can definitely include those questions. So as many of you know, I'm sure the theme for this year's International Women's Day is Choose to Challenge. And I absolutely love that, because I fundamentally believe without challenge, there is no change. And I think it's all about standing up and standing up to and against the status quo, and helping understand and appreciate the value that diversity brings to the workforce. And I know the spotlight today is on female leadership, but I think as we get into the conversation, we're going to really explore the full topic of equity, diversity, and inclusion as well. So without further ado, we're going to dive right in. So Diana, so great to have you. And I know in having read your bio and learning a little bit more about you, is that you've had a number of years of experience in senior roles, both at the organizational transformation level and brand growth. But can you share a little bit more about some of your areas of expertise and the journey that brought you to where you are today?
Absolutely. And thank you guys so much for having me, and so passionate about this conversation, and really can't wait to dive into it with all of you. So in terms of a little bit of my background in a snapshot, I am so fortunate to have had the privilege of working for 3 phenomenal organizations throughout my career in a number of different categories. I started my career now a long time back at PepsiCo, then spent 13 years at Mars, and I'm now at Kraft Heinz, and I've been here for about 6 months. Also fortunate to have worked in a number of different functions, from marketing to customer marketing to sales strategy and transformation. And have covered everything from carbonated soft drinks to water to confectionery to pet nutrition, and across the board. I would say some of the most incredible highlights in my career have really involved the toughest times. And that's something that I actually want to bring into the conversation today, is getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's in your career, and also in relation to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Is when you are uncomfortable, that's when the growth happens. Mm-hmm. And that is how I've managed my career. So if I think about the scariest moments in my career, when I took on a job or an opportunity where, in one example, our cat business at Mars was in a 2-year decline. And from a global perspective, we weren't sure where we were going, but we were the #1 cat manufacturer in Canada. And it was, you guys have to turn it around. And really and truly dissecting everything from consumer all the way through the value chain to figure out how to break it apart to put the pieces back together.
Mhm.
And that's when I learned actually in my career journey that I love transformation. I actually get bored when things are going really, really well. And so I really have learned that I love pulling things apart, understanding both from a business and a human side, how to then put it back together to get the most out of the business and get the most out of people. And
Mhm.
so all that to say is I've been so fortunate to work for 3 phenomenal organizations, have multiple different opportunities being in Canada. I've been in Canada most of my career. I've been in the US for 2 years and worked on a number of global teams and global strategy where I had opportunities to look at developed versus developing markets and what that meant for transformation. And so I'm just so excited to be here today to share hopefully some nuggets and some learnings that you can take away for your own career, but also the approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Awesome. Thank you. And one of the things I just want to dissect a little bit more that you just touched on was this idea of growth comes from uncomfort and being uncomfortable in certain situations. And I think one of the sayings that we're all very familiar with is fake it till you make it. And what's your perspective on that? And is that something that you've done in your career, and how did that end? And I think kind of just also building on that is, have you seen women been as successful in doing that as their male counterparts, and what's kind of the lens or perspective on that?
I think the biggest thing I've learned in my career is I actually never questioned why I was at a table. And I've been fortunate enough for that, to be honest, in most tables that I sit at, I'm usually the youngest.
Mhm.
And in a lot of cases, I have been one of the only females. And then you add the extra layer of a female with young kids.
Yeah.
So I think that that whole dynamic, and actually growing up in this business and particularly in CPG, when I first came in, I didn't necessarily have role models in senior leadership that either had young kids, because most females at the time, their kids were older in the positions that I wanted to be in,
Yeah.
or separately had made different decisions in how they raised their children.
Mhm.
And so for me, it was, okay, well, there's no one yet there at the table that has the path that I want. So
Right.
how do I be that? That was number one.
Okay.
And then the second is, absolutely, I have dealt with the imposter syndrome, and I have dealt with the fake it till you make it. And I have absolutely been at tables where I'm like, oh my gosh, when are they going to find out that I actually don't know what I'm talking about? But I go back to every single time I have put myself in that situation, it's made me stronger, it's
Mhm.
made me grow, and it's actually propelled me to even the next level.
Mhm.
So the only thing that I really want to share with you guys today on that is, no matter what level you are at an organization, that feeling is normal. If you embrace it instead and have it fuel you instead of actually hold you back, that can be a huge, huge benefit. Use it as your fuel.
Mhm. I love that. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. So getting a little bit into the equity, diversity, inclusion side, through the theme this year around choose to challenge, one of the things that International Women's Day is pushing is a challenged world is an alert world. And that we're all responsible for our own actions and thoughts all day, every day. And so I was wondering if you have an example of how you made a positive impact within your organization or even within your personal life, of how you've removed unconscious bias or inequality to help persevere and help get either women or underrepresented minorities into a place where they deserve to be.
Fantastic question. And I love the view of choose to challenge.
Mhm.
And we are responsible for our own actions every single day. And if I think about the way I approach diversity, equity, and inclusion on a daily basis, and it's a daily dedication, it's be curious, be brave, be humble, and be dedicated. Because there are so many aspects to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the spectrum changes all the time.
Mhm.
It is so important to keep that curiosity, and that curiosity starts with understanding your own bias, because every single one of us on the call, in this conversation, and out in the world has bias.
Yes.
You may not want to accept that, but every single one of us has bias. So the
Mhm.
work that needs to be done first in order to actually make a change is being curious and understanding that first.
Yes.
The work starts with yourself. Then it moves to making a positive change. a couple of areas in terms of positive change, I would say. So I've been fortunate enough to be the executive sponsor when I was at Mars, and then now also at Kraft Heinz, of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's a huge passion of mine. And I would say everything from the wins have been in mentorship, but also in education. And now we've got to move from education to allyship and advocacy.
Yes.
So in terms of my personal growth and learning, there's a couple of things I want to share. I think moving from the conversation to not only be about race and gender, I think that was a huge move and win for organizations.
Yeah.
So we are not there yet on race and gender, no question. And there's still so much work to be done, but moving it to race, gender, sexual orientation, mental illness, age.
Yes.
That disability, physical and otherwise.
Yeah.
So one of the things we are having a lot of conversations on at Kraft Heinz, and I think it's so important to continue, is to get to inclusion and belonging, because that is the ultimate goal, is that sense of belonging and inclusion. You have to understand the spectrum, and you have to move the conversation, again, not just to be about race and sex, but all the way along the line. Because until you unlock all of those things, you will never get your best out of your organization. You will never get your best out of people. You will, if we bring it back to business, you will not get the innovation, the creativity, and the points of view that are reflective of the communities that we serve. And if I think about it for Kraft Heinz from a business lens, we are in 97% of Canadian households.
Wow. Yeah.
If our opportunity is to feed and to democratize good food and nourishing food for all Canadians, how can we do that if we do not have an associate base reflective of the populations that we serve? How can we truly be consumer obsessed, which is a key value for us, if we're working in the law of averages,
right?
And we're not working in the nuance? Because just as the growth and the power is being uncomfortable, the growth is in the nuance and truly understanding human behavior. And you never get to that with the law of averages. So I would say that's our approach, but I can share with you some really personal growth moments that smacked me in the face on my journey, if you like.
We would love that.
So, I mean, being the executive sponsor of diversity, equity, and inclusion, you would think, oh yeah, Dad, no problem. She understands it all. Two big moments in my life that really smacked me in the face. So one, we were doing a partnership with Dress for Success with Mars.
Yeah.
And we were bringing all of our female leaders at the time, and we were going to have a workshop on interviews and resumes and all of those things. And I remember being so proud of the panel we'd set up, and we were having great conversations. And one brave and phenomenal female who was sitting in the audience that day stood up and said, with all due respect, none of you have the background that I have. You're all women and you're all very talented women, but you all went to great universities.
Yeah.
You're all relatively young. You all come from a certain upbringing. So how can I see myself in your shoes? Because all of you guys are under 35. I'm 50. So that one brought to the forefront age, which we don't talk about a lot at all in terms of older versus younger. So I think that was a big one. The second one was I was in a course, in a leadership course, and they put us out into the south side of Chicago for a day with an organization, a not-for-profit called CARA. It was a phenomenal organization that essentially focuses on long-term employment and careers for those who have battled addiction, prison time, and have had tough upbringings. And they put us into those days, and it was probably some of the most fascinating and eye-opening days I've ever had. And you sit there and you just learn. And they didn't tell us anything about what we were going to experience. And we worked out in the streets that day. We talked about different programming and all of those things. But what hit me more than anything is a lot of times we use the notion of hiring people in spite of their background as opposed to because of it. Wouldn't it be amazing to hire someone who has had the resilience to overcome gang life, addiction, all of those things. Don't you want that type of resilience and fortitude on your team?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's so phenomenal. And I know my husband's at Deloitte and he leads their business transformation group. And one of the initiatives that they took on is they actually leveraged a company called Auticon that employs people with autism that are on the spectrum, and they bring them into these consulting engagements through Deloitte, and they work with them to help bring them into the workforce and deliver on these projects. And so it was a really big, and it was interesting. I was obviously on the sidelines just listening and learning and watching and how this went, but it was all about leveraging the skill sets of individuals in an environment that they're comfortable with and giving them that opportunity. And I think, to your point, Diana, what we're so with our unconscious bias and the way that we've normally done things is we're so reluctant to go a different path and to create resistance in any capacity. And if it's not always the easiest route, then we don't necessarily do that. But I think opening up our minds and our hearts to even to bring in these different people and to work with them. And I think it kind of leading into the next question around the value of it. And I think notionally organizations understand diversity drives value, it drives diversity of thought. But do you have any examples of how diversity and inclusion has generated value for your organization? Any kind of interesting case studies you can share?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can share a couple. I think from a Mars perspective, even through value of brand. So we'll go back, I'll take a step back for a second. To your point, diversity of thought and different perspectives at the table, 100% hand on heart is better for business.
Yeah.
So people talk about it's the right thing to do, and it's also better for business. The innovation that you get, the creativity that you get, the connection with consumers that you get.
Yes.
Like that for me, if I go back to CPG and that is my world, consumer obsession is first and foremost.
Right.
First and foremost, we have to understand the consumer at a level and a depth in order to connect with them with our products, with how we speak to consumers, and so on and so forth. So I'll actually share with you two examples. So back at Mars, the Skittles campaign. And I'm not sure if any of you guys are aware of the Skittles campaign, but Skittles is always and has always been known as a very irreverent brand in business. And you probably know the communication. But one of the things that we did through Pride Month was actually come out with the rainbow is not ours. The rainbow actually belongs to the LGBTQ community. Right. And really speaking to consumers in that way. And so for the month of Pride Month, we actually sold the white Skittles bag, which is in partnership with the LGBTQ community, how we actually communicate with consumers. And then of the proceeds of what we sold to go back to teens and more so youth within that community. Wow. And drove phenomenal business results, not only from a household penetration standpoint, but in engagement and all of that. So that's a small example. Another example that I have right now and that we're working on is Kraft Hockeyville. Kraft Hockeyville is an absolutely huge platform for us. Huge platform for us. Has been around for 14 to 15 years. But similar to the sport of hockey, is very much white and is very much rural. Right. So one of the things that we're looking at is, again, being in 97% of Canadian households, what is the opportunity there? Mm-hmm. And right now we are forming a partnership with the Hockey Diversity Alliance and the HDA, and bringing the HDA into the hockey fold, because access to hockey for all and actually eradicating systemic racism within the game of hockey and a platform that we are very close to is very important. And then the third piece I think is so important is we have signed on to the Black North Initiative, and we're also working with the Ethnic Food Incubator, and we just had an amazing actually session with them about 2 weeks ago, where that group actually presented us innovation in kind of a Shark Tank Dragon's Den type of view, and so it actually fuels our innovation pipeline. Yeah, I love it. There's so much value in it, but it does go back to the value to business is understanding your consumers. And you will not understand your consumers if you do not have an associate and employee population reflective of the communities that you serve.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you had said earlier, and it's what we've heard a lot with our clients too, is they want a workforce that's reflective of the Canadian population. So building on that, what diversity and inclusion metrics does Kraft Heinz currently track today? And is there something that they're working towards in the future as well on that front?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and one that's a very hot topic at the moment. Currently, from a metrics perspective, we voluntarily gather data.
Yeah.
But currently there are no metrics that we share publicly. And
okay.
That is actually, our Global Inclusion Council is working on that as we speak. So there's a lot more to come in that area, because it is important. I think the biggest thing that we track right now, to be honest, is engagement. And in engagement and net promoter score in relation to engagement. And then through our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council, the move this year, and I would say over the last couple of years, it's very much been an education and awareness. The pivot is allyship and advocacy. And what that means, because being proactive in that space is very different than educating in that space. Right. And that's the move that Kraft Heinz is making right now.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, it's interesting to see where organizations sit on the spectrum. And I think a lot of the kind of the commonplace diversity meter surveys that are out there look at the demographic information. They look at sexual orientation and sexual expression, and then they have the inclusion questions as well. And helping them create that baseline understanding across, so that from there going forward, they can start to create strategies to build on that. And I love what you said. At the end of the day, it's all about inclusion. And so the reason that you have diversity is to drive that inclusive environment and to get the best out of people, because people, when they're in an environment that they feel safe and respected, and that's the time that they have the opportunity to share. So building on that a little bit is, do you have an example of a time where you've been challenged around ED&I, or where there's been someone, whether any level within the organization, where people aren't seeing the value from it, or people feel though we've gone too far in one direction to create this inclusive culture? I know it's an interesting question, and the reason that I ask is that we do a lot of training around this topic, and one of the challenges is that you often have you have the spectrum of people that are from advocacy through to I'm kind of unaware of what's happening, to, you know what, I don't fundamentally agree with what's happening, and pushing this agenda forward, if you will. Have you had any challenges with that? And if you have, how have you overcome that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say I've seen it all. I've seen it from one end of the spectrum where amazing leaders are like, absolutely, let's go. And I love Kraft Heinz in the sense that it's like, it's a principle and a value on the wall. We demand diversity, as opposed to that's an option. No, the value and the principle is we demand diversity. Mm-hmm. And then the action and behavior comes behind it. But in terms of how people feel throughout organizations, and Mars was well over 100,000 associates, and Kraft Heinz is over 38,000 associates, you get different people along the spectrum. Mm-hmm. Some saying, totally get it. Others saying, oh, now we're getting into reverse discrimination. And now we're actually getting into hiring for quotas as opposed to hiring for the right talent. Mm-hmm. And I think the one thing I go back to is every single time is the why. So the why, once again, is how do you have the right collection of people with the right experiences, the right backgrounds? And one thing we haven't even gotten into today is the right personalities, because personality bias is huge. Hiring people who have the same personality as you do, or similar tendencies. And really going back to why you are hiring, what the goal is. Yes. And calling people out and being very honest, and even in the last year or so, I've had to do that, of like, what is the fear? What is the undertone of the why people are worried that we won't hire for talent anymore? What is the concern that the progress that's being made is at the detriment of someone else? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And going back to always hire for the best person for the job. But make sure that the pool of people that you are actually looking at to hire is reflective of the communities that you operate in. Yes. Because you have a higher likelihood of getting the right person for the job. Right. Yeah. So
do you have any best practices for hiring that you personally have leveraged or the team at Kraft Heinz has leveraged as well? I know that's a pretty big topic for people as well. And any tips on that you can share?
Yeah, I think one of them is actually taking names off of resumes. So I mean, I think that's one that a lot of people are employing, but I think that's extremely important, is looking at the experience more so than anyone else. I would say also looking at different groups to partner with than to hire from. So whether it's the universities that you recruit from, whether it's the student groups that you work with. And one of the partners we have is Lime Connect, which also speaks to folks with disabilities, and looking at that as a hiring pool. So I think it's the pools that you look at. I think it's your hiring practices. I think it's how you make sure you have a balanced slate of potential candidates.
Right.
So that before it even gets to someone like me, that you've already looked at, you have a balanced slate of candidates and you have a balanced slate of those evaluating the candidates.
Yes. Yeah.
That's super important in making sure that you drive that. And that's only in hiring. That's not how you actually drive your teams and the types of conversations you have with your teams to get the best out of them once they are in the building.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. One of the, what I just wanted to kind of circle back on and touch on is, so you were saying within kind of Kraft Heinz right now, along your ED&I journey, if you will, you're at the awareness and education stage. Can you share what some of the activities and initiatives that you did to build that, in terms of everything from creating the strategy to communicating the strategy to training? What does that look like from an employee perspective, and what's been really successful around that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to call out, so Andrea Scott and a bunch of the team at Kraft Heinz, who's done a phenomenal job in actually putting together our house, our D&I house. So obviously we have we demand diversity as our value, but going down below that and actually has a house that goes everything from awareness, education, training, all of those things. So they do all of them. We've got 4 resource groups from that focus on LGBTQ, that focus on systemic racism, that focuses on gender, and then the last one, which focuses on bias. So some of the activities over the last year have been bringing in external speakers and key advocates and experts, and actually having conversations within these particular spaces, and having enough time to hear from the experts, but also have a working session afterwards to say, okay, then what is the action that we can take from it? Mm-hmm. And so we've had speakers. We've also had unconscious bias training from a leadership level, and that's going to go all the way down through our employees and associates. Yeah. Because as I said before, the first work that has to be done is actual personal work. Yes. Before you can actually do the business work, you have to understand and be curious and be dedicated, and actually showcasing the benefit of that, and training people, arming people to have the right conversations. The third piece that's really important, and we haven't talked about it yet, is mental health. Yeah. How you actually also bring mental health into the equation, specifically in terms of what's happening through COVID and how that is on steroids. Yeah. Yeah. And how that has affected your workforce, and how that comes into play when you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how we historically have not treated mental health as the disease that it is. Yes. And so we had a very powerful session with our associate base on that. And I'll share with this small intimate group of 63 or 64, I lost a friend through COVID from mental illness. And until that, actually, we lose the stigma with that, you will never get to belonging. Yeah. You will never get to truly flourishing in your work and in your life if we do not, at the corporate level and at the human level, attack that particular piece head on. And that's one at Kraft Heinz we're also looking at very, very closely. Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that. I think the mental health component, I think it has hit everyone in a different capacity. And one of the sayings that really stuck with me that I've seen through this is that we're all in the same storm, but we're not in the same ship. Some of us have yachts, some of us have canoes, and some of us are floating, just trying to stay alive. And I think
that to me just really hits home in the sense that we're all in it together, but how we are able to handle it both from our own kind of mental capacity, but then also the resources that we have around us. And I think kind of relating that back to diversity a bit, and having such a diverse workforce, you see the struggle that people go through. And I'm just wondering, as an organization, what are some of the things that you guys have done that have been really successful in supporting people in different situations? I know kind of at the beginning around work-life balance and giving people alternative working hours and things like that. But from a leadership point of view, is there anything that you've done that you've seen to be really helpful for people?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the important part is the situational leadership component of it. You can't put out a blanket policy because, to your point, we're all in the same storm, but in a different ship. Yeah. And one of the things that Kraft Heinz did actually before lockdown last year was employed a program called Work Like an Owner, which is, you guys are all adults. Like, whether you work from the office, or you work from Starbucks, or you work from home, manage your life, because you will be better for us and more productive for the organization if you're not like, oh my gosh, I can't get to a dentist appointment for my kid, or my kids play, or even those who don't have kids. If you can't manage your world, how do you expect to perform your best? And so I would say the Work Like an Owner, it was great that it was launched actually before COVID, but it's something that we've continued to double down on through COVID. Is that flexibility is so important for women and men alike. I mean, I had my two kids home for a year. It was a gong show, absolute gong show. But I knew that I was able to work like an owner. So the flexibility that comes in different hours, and when I can be at my best while being a terrible stay-at-home teacher for my kids, I learned I went into the right profession, because teaching I never would have been good at, is so important. So I think the Work Like an Owner's, it's a blanket policy, but it's managed situationally. So I think the more that organizations can lean into the workforce of the future and how you get your best out of folks, you'll never get away from the fact that creativity and collaboration and the buzz of being together, yes, that's important for our business. But even more importantly, it's understanding as a leader, as a manager, and even more importantly, as a human, how you get the best out of folks, and having that flexibility will return back to you in spades.
Yes, I love that. That's amazing. And it's interesting to see the organizations that are still very time bound. And I absolutely respect there's certain roles that require that. So if you're working in a contact center, I get it. You need to be on from 9 till 5, and that's what it looks like. But to your point, if you instill that sense of what's the word? I'm not entitlement, but if you give people the freedom and the flexibility to thrive, that's when you start to see the results. On a more personal note, have you felt in the past year, again, kind of relating it back to the pandemic, a blur between work and life, like so many of us have? And I kind of want to just build on this a little bit. There was a really great article, I think it came out through Harvard Business Review, and it was around the fatigue and the mental fogginess that so many leaders are feeling right now. And we've been through this for a year. The whole phenomenon, excitement of baking bread and all of that has passed, and we lived through the summer and it was kind of okay. And now we're back down again. And yes, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but this is really a trying period for so many people. And from a leadership perspective, it's the losing the excitement and the connection that you have with your team because of this virtual environment, and no one wants another virtual cocktail party. And so how do you keep persevering? How do you build on that resiliency, and how do you keep your team motivated when, if and when you've ever felt kind of like, okay, I'm getting to the end here?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And that fatigue is absolutely true. I feel it. I live it every single day. The blur between when you turn off, because when you're working from home, you don't have the commute to turn off. So this constant feeling and need to be on, and everyone knows I'm not doing anything else because it's a pandemic. So feeling the need to respond to everything all the time. So I think the first stage in that is acknowledging it with your teams and showing the vulnerability that you're in it too. I think that is so incredibly important. And there are days where I will just say to my team, I'm like, I'm really struggling today. and I'm struggling for this reason and this reason. So this is the help that I need. I think showing that vulnerability is so incredibly important and powerful because it humanizes everyone and everything. I also think that the added layer and complexity that I've had is I've never met my team. I started at Kraft Heinz 5.5 months ago. So onboarding in a pandemic and not having that personal connection and to engage and to motivate, it really was and has been, how do I spend more time getting to know the people through the computer so that I can understand truly what motivates them, but also understanding the ship they're in. Because every single person on my team is in a different spot. So how I continue to try and motivate is it is this constant open communication of this is where we are at this week. And that may be different than where we were last week. And then pivoting, okay, that worked. Oh, this didn't work. And figuring out different ways because it's not perfect. Everyone is like, I do not want another Zoom cocktail party. I do not want another Zoom bingo or whatever it is. And many people don't. But how do you stay connected? But it's that continuous conversation and open communication and showing my vulnerability at the same time.
No, that's amazing. I think even within our team at CSPN, the transparency and vulnerability, one of the things that we've done that's been very effective is every day without fail, 9 a.m., we're all on a quick call, 15 minutes to just talk about the day, any challenges, what we're focused on. And I find these kind of quick touch points just gives that added connection. And then with each individual person, like you were saying, is figuring out what it is that they need to be successful. And again, the vulnerability and the transparency is amazing because even we as leaders, we've never had to navigate this, the quick pivot to work from home, the constant virtual environment. And I think having all of that change on you, we're at the end of the day, we're all people, like you said, and we're all trying to make this work for everybody, but no one's perfect all the time. And it's being able to identify and respect that for everyone.
Yeah, and I think there's something you really mentioned there on communication. So I talked about over communication. We do a weekly leadership team brief with the entire company.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Weekly briefing where, so not only my individual team, but all of Kraft Heinz Canada, it's like, this is what's going on and people can submit questions before. So it's not only a constant communication in individual teams, but it's a consistent communication with the entire organization.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. We have only a couple minutes left. I just wanted to pivot a little bit and focus on female leadership. And I guess ask you, again, on a personal level, are there any, I know you mentioned earlier that when you were kind of looking at the leadership team at one point in your life, there wasn't necessarily anyone that was reflective of you in terms of a young executive, a mother with young kids, but is there anyone that you can say that you've looked up to and what were some of their qualities and traits and what have you taken away from them?
Absolutely. And I could talk forever about this topic. I think that I've been so lucky to have so many phenomenal female leaders throughout my career that I've taken different parts of to then build up my authentic style of leadership. And I think that is so incredibly important. And one of the biggest things I've learned before I get into my role models is there's this whole notion of you can have it all. My view on that is you can have your all. So one of the things I would love to leave with everybody here today is figure out your definition of all. And then don't measure it by anyone else's standard. Because your definition by virtue is that you cannot measure someone else's definition. And if someone prioritizes something that's different than you, that's okay. Yeah. So the biggest thing I'm constantly doing is like, what is my all? And my all is I want to be a present mom for my kids and a role model for my kids. And I want to kick ass in business. And I want to be a leader that people, anyone who I strive, and I do not always get there, but strive to be the type of leader that whether it's a conversation or a meeting or having worked with me for a number of years, people feel better for the time that they've spent with me. Mm-hmm. That is the goal, leaving businesses and people better off than when you came to them.
Yes.
And my definition of all is going to be different than yours, is going to be different than other people's. So that is one thing I have learned, and it's served me well. In terms of the leaders that I look up to, one of them, so that there's two. One is Tracy Massey. So Tracy Massey is the global pet nutrition president at Mars. And Tracy is phenomenal in the sense that she came from a supply background, was not in finance, moved over to finance, became the global CFO for Mars Chocolate, then was like, there's no way I can be a president. And our global CEO at the time, Grant Reed, he's still the global CEO at Mars, said, I need you to go be the North American president for confectionery. And she was like, as long as I have an out clause to come back into finance. But then she got 2 weeks in on the job and she said, no one is ever going to buy into me as a leader unless I go all in.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest things I've learned about through Tracy, one is authenticity wins every time. Do not be a leader that you think you should be. Be your type of leader. And me as a leader, again, is different than you, Jessica, and different than Tracy. Don't try and emulate someone else because people will smell it from a mile away.
Mm-hmm.
Authentic leadership first and foremost. Number two is boldness. Ask for what you want.
Yeah.
In my career, I've been sitting at tables with men who make $70,000 to $100,000 more than me. Once I found that out, I had the honest conversation. It was like, if you value me the way that you say you value me, the numbers are suggesting differently.
Yes.
So help me understand. And so you don't go at it from a combative standpoint. You go at it from seeking to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Once you have the data and the facts, go at it from seeking to understand and say, you tell me that I'm a superstar and you tell me that my career is going this way. The facts don't seem to substantiate it. So is there something I'm missing?
Yes.
And a lot of times I will tell you that most people don't know. So my manager at the time had no idea of the disparity or hadn't looked at it. And within a week, it was corrected. Actually, within 2 weeks, it was corrected. So I think there's understand the facts, understand your value, and ask, again, not in a combative way.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah.
I think it's so important. Know your worth.
Mm-hmm.
Know your worth and demand your worth.
Yeah.
And you can do it again in a non-combative manner. So I think authenticity I've learned from Tracy, boldness I've learned from Tracy, being completely uncomfortable I've learned from Tracy. She pulled me out of the Canadian market after I was vice president of marketing through the Mars Wrigley merger to run US transformation for confectionery. And at the time, and a lot of it was supply chain complexity and all of that stuff, inclusive of the areas I know, which is marketing and portfolio transformation. But a lot of things I did not know. And it was the biggest business in the world. It was $7 billion business. And it was like, just come down. And I was like, and she's like, we don't have a team. You don't have a job description. Just come down. And when Tracy asks you to do something, you're like, okay. But in the background, I was like, holy shit. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. But it was the best job I ever took because I was completely uncomfortable. And she did the same thing through her leadership. She went from supply chain to finance to being a general manager and president of an organization. So that's the other one is be uncomfortable, because if you put yourself out there to be uncomfortable, that's when you grow exponentially. And from that, this role at Kraft Heinz came up to take on something even more substantial and a transformation. So those were the biggest things. And Tracy is absolutely phenomenal.
Amazing. So be bold, be authentic, be uncomfortable.
Yep.
Love it. I love it. Well, Diana, thank you so much for your time today. I know we have about 1 minute left. And I thought just in conclusion, going back to the theme of today's Choose to Challenge, if you could leave everyone with one statement around choose to challenge, what would you challenge people to do today and in the future?
Yeah, so it actually kind of goes back to the key messages, but it's all about being curious, being bold, being humble, and being dedicated. And in the end, it's being authentically you. So it goes back to defining what is your all, what does that mean, and then go after it. Because again, that is going to be different for every single one of you on the phone. And that will be the difference. Your why is going to be different than someone else's. Define your why, be curious and bold and learn, but be authentically you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today. We are so thankful to have you, and happy International Women's Day, and hope you have a fantastic week. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. I love the time. I love the conversation, and happy International Women's Day to you as well.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining. And the session will be, the recorded session will be available for you to go back and review later. And Jenna, did you have anything to say to close it off?
Just one quick item. We did have one question, and of course, if anyone else has any really quick questions for Diana, you can kindly put them in the chat. But this question, someone is wondering, what about if the hiring managers always feel that minority groups are not the best qualified for management roles? So that was the question that they had. If you have an answer for that, Diana, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it goes back to the conversation about where are you looking for your talent? And I think it does go back to always hire the best for the role. Absolutely. But just make sure you're looking at the right pool of talent, and the right pool of talent at the junior level to then foster and grow in and succession plan into those roles at the management level. So there's two things. It's not only hiring externally for the management levels, but what are the pool of folks that you are bringing in at a junior level to grow and nurture and foster to get ready. So don't compromise on talent, but make sure you have a true understanding of the pools in which you look at in your hiring process.
Oh, Jenna, you're on mute.
Typical. Thank you so much, Diana. And the last question from Cynthia: how many executive leaders at Kraft Canada are part of the diversity group?
Well, I would say from a leadership perspective, all of them are involved. I mean, I'm the executive sponsor, but we get updates. So our president is very involved. Our chief people officer is extremely involved. We now have a global inclusion council at the global executive leadership team level. So very involved. And I would also say Kraft Heinz has been on a phenomenal journey over the last couple of years. I look at our Canadian leadership team, and there were very few, if not any, females previously. And then I think there was one, and now there's two. So our head of supply and myself are females within our executive leadership team. And it's going to be a journey. I think we do a very good job at the more, at the less senior roles within the organization and within certain functions, but other functions are consistently going to be areas of focus. And so the answer to your question is the leadership team is extremely involved. Myself as the executive sponsor, but updates monthly and very involved in all of the conversations. And at the global level, we are having a conversation on metrics and data and what that looks like. So more to come.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Diana, again, for joining us today, and Jessica as well, and everyone joining us in the audience. So before we go, I'm just going to send out a quick poll. You can just let us know how we did today. We'd really appreciate it. But other than that, I'll pass it back over to Jessica to cap off the session.
Wonderful. So thank you again, Diana. Happy International Women's Day to everyone, and have a great afternoon. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.